I do appreciate everybody coming back after last week's lesson. Well, I say everybody. I mean, Cynthia's gone, and Shirley's gone, and Dan and Alexis are gone. So Raymond and Janet are gone. So I really did feel like that I would lose half the crowd after last week's lesson. Yeah, but anyway, we're going to finish up Nehemiah today. And as I've said, we'll start the book of Job next week. It's a little different type of study than what we've done in the past with Job. But we'll get more into that next week. I'm jumping ahead of myself. So, now see, there's Terry. He bound the hammer, and now he gets up and walks around.
He thinks he's got to make more coffee.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Did you make Mike sick?
Oh, yeah, Mike's not here. Boy, we do have a lot of people out today.
It's all being
like
recorded.
I said, we didn't
I
have
know.
Lincoln this weekend 'cause he was still coughing and hacking. Hadley's still coughing and hacking. So.
Can I start now, Terry? All right.
Am I not rotating?
Huh? Okay.
I'm so confused.
So am I. All right, Nehemiah 13. So I want to set the stage because there is a gap of time between the end of chapter 12 and the beginning of chapter 13. Now, if you can recall, the last several chapters of Nehemiah has been the celebration of the wall being rebuilt, the dedication of the wall, the recommitment to keeping the law of Moses, the recommitment to the temple and the activities of the temple, and taking care of the priests and all the ones involved in the temple work. The people all the way back in, chapter 9 and especially chapter 10 have really set themselves up and have signed this covenant that we're going to live for the Lord. Well, guess what happens? It doesn't last very long. Now, there is a period of time between the end of chapter 12 and the highlights of the last few chapters to the beginning of chapter 13, but we do see a significant downfall in their commitment to what they signed back in chapter 10. If you remember, chapter 9 and 10 were what they committed to do, and it was also the signing of this covenant that we are going to keep the law of Moses. So, but much in our own lives, we make a promise to God, and then seemingly just a few minutes after we make the promise, we get up and turn around and we've sinned. But so these people are probably not much different than what we are, but we like to think that we're better committed to serving the Lord than what these people ended up doing. But nevertheless, we find ourselves seemingly time and time again breaking our promises to God. But God is still faithful. So that being said, so at some point after chapter 12, Nehemiah does go back to Jerusalem. But as we're going to see here in chapter 13, he goes back to Shushan, sorry. At some point before chapter 13 begins, he comes back to Jerusalem, and he finds what we're going to read here, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 13. So now, the three first words there in verse 1, on that day, does not refer to on that day, referring to what happened in chapter 12, but on the day that he returned to Jerusalem, this is what he finds, okay? So let's not connect the first phrase of chapter 13, verse 1 with chapter 12, because there is a significant time break, perhaps a couple of years even. So anyway, that being said, we'll start with verse 1, which seems like a good place to start. Well,
Nehemiah 13.
there we go.
On that day, they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, because they met not the children of Israel with bread and with water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude.
So they gather together, they're hearing the scripture read, and they read the scripture that they're not to have the Ammonite or the Moabite in amongst their people. Well, guess what? They look around, and the Moabites and the Ammonites have come in. Now, more on that later as well, but understand that God had put a curse on these two types of people because they sought for the destruction of Israel even during the wandering in the wilderness when Moses is leading them to the promised land. And so God had made a curse on these two people, these groups of people, that they were to never become entangled or involved in the business or anything having to do with Israel. And here now they read this in Scripture, and they look around, and they're in among them. And again, more on that as later as well. But so, after hearing this law read to them, they separate themselves, and they get rid of these ones that were of the Ammonites and Moabites. Now, this does not preclude individuals of these two people groups to be able to come in, because we know that Ruth was a Moabitess, and she came in because she forsook the ways of her people and became a Jew by choice. She was compelled to become a Jew and to follow after her mother-in-law Naomi, and came to Judah with her mother-in-law way back in the book of Ruth. So it was not to preclude individuals to forsake their old life and to turn to the God of Israel, but this was just a general, you're not to allow the Moabites and the Ammonites here. Now, it's no different from us here at church. We don't allow people that don't know the Lord and have not saved to become members. It's the same type of thing. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, it tells us that believers and unbelievers are not to mix. Now, we think of that perhaps in marriage and that type of thing, but that's also in business and those types of activities as well. So the rule basically still stands that believers are not to be mixed with unbelievers, whether it's, again, in relationships or in business or in marriage. So, after reading that, they separate themselves. Now, I would like to have a lot more detail as to how actually they did that, but we do see here that they got rid of, somehow or the other, the Ammonites and the Moabites amongst them. But again, I want us to understand that even though this was against groups of people, this was not against individuals. So if an individual wanted to forsake their old life, much like we do when we come to Christ, and they wanted to join in with the Jews, that was allowed. And again, Ruth being a good picture of that. So that's what's going on when Nehemiah comes and he sees and hears the reading of the word, and the people hear this and they separate themselves. Now, keep this in mind as we read these next few verses here. Verse 4.
And before this, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah.
Now, here is Eliashib the priest, and it says there that he has the oversight of the temple, and he's allied with Tobiah. Does everybody remember what group that Tobiah was a member of? He was an Ammonite. Now, and so here is the high priest, best buddies with one of the enemies. Now, if you remember all the way back in chapter 2 and in preceding chapters, Tobiah was one of the chief instigators or agitators against Nehemiah and rebuilding the wall. So here we have one of the guys that was the worst thorn in the side of Nehemiah. Now all of a sudden, he's buddy-buddy with the high priest. Not only that, but let's look at verse 5.
And he had prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid the meat offerings, the frankincense, and the vessels, and the tithes of the corn, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the offerings of the priests.
What this is telling us is Eliashib actually allowed Tobiah to live in the temple, in a room that was prepared for meat offerings, frankincense, the vessels, the tithes of corn, new wine, oil, all that was supposed to be brought to the temple to be offered to the Levites. Eliashib has allowed the enemy to move into this room in the temple. Now this tells us two things. First of all, this room was supposed to be filled with offerings of the people, and apparently it was empty. So that means that, and we'll find this out later, the people weren't bringing their offerings like they were supposed to. And not only that, the room was empty, which was a picture of how bad the people had fallen. But now this same room that was supposed to be for the use of the priests, the Levites, has now been given over to as an apartment, so to speak, to Tobiah, who was not only an Ammonite, but again, an instigator, an agitator to Nehemiah and the people in building the wall. This is to me, I say it this way, perhaps it's too strong of a word, it's blasphemy. That this was to go on. Not only was the room empty, and it's not supposed to have been, but now you have somebody that God had said that they weren't allowed to even be a part of. Now he's living right there in the temple area. This is a big deal. But again, it shows the failure of the high priest, Eliashib here, but it also shows the failure of the people. Now perhaps the people have failed the Lord because the high priest failed. You know, the leadership that they were looking to was allowing this to go on. So if the high priest don't care, why should we? But that's really not a proper way to look at it, but that's probably what has happened here. So this degradation of the people and the covenant they made in chapter 9 and 10, for however many years, now it's just gone and forgotten about. It's a sad state of affairs that Nehemiah finds when he comes back to Jerusalem here. And I want us to understand this room that Tobias is living in was supposed to be for the offerings that the people had brought for the Levites to live off of. Okay? That's how bad this is. And we're going to build on this as we go through here. Verse 6.
But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king. And I came to Jerusalem, and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah, in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God.
So, Nehemiah comes back to town. How long has he been gone? We don't know. We know it took 4 months to get there and back, so there's 8 months of just travel time. But can you imagine? You leave the people. They're all set up for success. They've all made this promise, this covenant to God. They've had this document and they've signed it and they've promised. And you come back just a few years later and you find this mess. I would say Nehemiah probably did well to not just bust some heads. But nevertheless. And then imagine, he goes back and not only does he find the people have strayed, but now Tobiah is living in the temple. Anyway, verse 8 here. Nehemiah tells us here, verse 8.
And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber.
Now get a picture here. Nehemiah goes into this apartment that Tobias is in and throws it all out into the courtyard perhaps, or wherever this would have been located in the temple. But I wonder if he had any help. Was Nehemiah the only one? I see him going in the closet and grabbing the hangers and throwing everything outside, just all of Tobias' stuff just strewn everywhere. But this is what I think Nehemiah needs to do to prove his point that you folks have really turned your back against God. And he's making not only a statement against Eliashib here, I think he's making a statement against Tobiah, and I think he's making a statement against the people in allowing this type of thing to happen. And it's not that he's just living in the city. He's living in the temple. So we see, Nehemiah pretty ticked off here and just empties the room of all of Tobiah's stuff out of this apartment or this chamber, this room that is mentioned in the temple area. Everybody okay so far? You all right, Terry? Okay. So, we've got this taken care of. Well, no, verse 9. We still got it. Verse 9.
Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers. And thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God, with the meat offering and the frankincense. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field.
All right, so apparently verse 9 is telling us that there were some meat offerings at the temple. Perhaps not enough to keep this room filled, but there were some because Nehemiah commanded that this room be cleansed. Perhaps they went in and prayed over it. Perhaps they ceremoniously sprinkled water or oil to kind of cleanse as a ceremony to get rid of the evil that was in it, so to speak. And he commanded that they bring in the meat offering, the frankincense, these vessels that were supposed to be in this room, bring them back. Now, this also as we see here in verse 10, this does also tell Nehemiah that perhaps the people had not been giving their offerings like they were supposed to, because not only was the room empty, but he noticed that the Levites were out in their field. Now keep in mind, the Levites were to be provided for by the people. They should not have to be out in the field tending crops and tending their livestock. They were to be taken care of by the people. And so Nehemiah not only has known that this room is empty, so that people hadn't been bringing the offerings, but he's also noticed that the Levites and the singers, those that were supposed to be working at the temple, were not at the temple because they were having to take care of their crops, which was another sign that the people had really let down. So we see here not only the leadership and Eliashib and what he's allowed to happen at the temple. We see here the Levites are having to work for their food. We are seeing here that the people are not bringing in the offerings as they were supposed to. So then that leaves the Levites to have to leave their job or their work at the temple and do. This is just all falling apart. And again, only in a matter of a few years. And whether it was 1 year or whether it was 10, the problem was that the people broke their promise that they made to God. And again, I believe we all do this. Maybe perhaps not at this level. I'm maybe justifying myself. But we all stray from our walk with the Lord time after time after time. But the thing is about it, we always go back. Why? Because the Holy Spirit lives inside of us. And we're always going back and asking for forgiveness, asking God to restore us, asking God to remember his grace and mercy towards us. But again, all that is because we have the Holy Spirit in us that draws us back. And this battle of the flesh is always back and forth, but we're always going back to the Lord. And in some ways, these people are as well, because they stray and they go back. We're seeing that through the book of Judges. They stray and they go back. They stray and they go back. And actually, if you look at the entirety of Israel, that was just the way they were, but that's the way we are as well. So, but going back to verse 10 here, Nehemiah realizes that things are really lacked, and the Levites are having to go out in the fields and work. Verse 11.
Then contended I with the rulers, and said, Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together, and set them in their place. Then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn, and the new wine, and the oil unto the treasuries. And I made treasurers over the treasuries, Shelemiah the priest, and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zakur, the son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God, and for the offices thereof.
So yeah, I like how Nehemiah says there in verse 11, why is the house of God forsaken? He looks at all these rulers of Judah and looks at him and says, what's happened? In some ways, Nehemiah is thinking that he's failed because I put you all in leadership, and look at the mess you've made. And I like how it says there, I set them in their place. Have we all been set in our place a time or two? So then he brought all Judah, the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil to the treasury. So that stirred up the leaders, and the people realized their faults, and they bring in these offerings that they were supposed to have been giving throughout their time that Nehemiah's been away. They're now bringing them in. And now verse 13 is showing that he is now putting people in charge to make sure this happens. And he names these ones here as being ones that he is faithful and he can trust that these people are going to see the work being done. And then verse 14, I just picture that Nehemiah is praying under his breath here as all this is going on. Remember me, God, I'm trying to do this for you, and these people are just hard-headed. Basically just this prayer of, I need help because these people aren't getting it. So anyway, that covers this first portion. Anybody got any comments or questions on this first 13, 14 verses? All right. That was good. Verse 15.
In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals.
So now he's noticing that even on the Sabbath day, not only are they not coming to the temple to worship, but they're out in their fields, they're gathering sheaves, they're pressing wine, they're lading their asses, they're selling goods. So not only now are they not even going to the temple, but now they're not even setting aside the Sabbath as a holy day and not doing any work. Now that goes on today. You know, Sunday's just another day to people that call themselves Christians. Sunday's just another day. There's not any difference. Well, it's a Sunday. I got to go do X, Y, and Z. I got to change my water heater. I got to do whatever. But now again, this was Saturday for them. It's Sunday for us. I'm not going to get into all those. But just understand that here, Nehemiah notices the people not coming to the temple, and they're just out doing work just like a normal old day. So not only have they turned their back on the temple, now they've turned their back on the day. Just another day. And now they're coming in and they're even selling on the Sabbath. Notice also verse 16, how what happens.
There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah, and in Jerusalem.
So now these outside people, these ones from Tyre, are coming in and bringing fresh fish in to sell. Not only at the gate, but inside the city on the Sabbath day. Now we'll see here in a moment what Nehemiah does here. But the gate was supposed to have been closed on the Sabbath day. The gate of the city was to be closed. And these people, these outsiders, these heathen, these Gentiles, are coming in on the Sabbath, and they're selling their stuff. I want us to just remind everybody so that we get this picture of what has happened since verse 1. The people have forsaken bringing their offerings. The leadership, Eliashib, has given over a room to the enemy. The people are not even coming to the temple. They're not even setting aside the Sabbath. Now they're just buying and selling. They're tending and farming and whatever they need to do on Sunday or else their Sabbath. They've completely forgotten what they were to be, which was God-fearing people. And now they're not only buying and selling from themselves, they're buying and selling from Gentiles inside the city on the Sabbath. Now this, Well, yeah. Oh, you're talking about Jesus. Yeah. Flipping the tables over. Yeah. Verse 17.
Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day?
Notice that he is blaming the nobles of Judah. He's not blaming the husband and housewife outside the city. He's blaming the leaders. So if we fail, it's Lee's fault. That's not at all true. We are all accountable to God for ourselves. But in some ways, the leaders have allowed this to just go on. They've allowed the offerings to not be brought in. They've allowed, Tobiah the enemy to come and live in the temple. They've allowed people to not bring offerings. They've allowed the work outside on the Sabbath. They've allowed the people of Tyre to come in and sell. They've allowed the Jews to buy and sell on the Sabbath. The leadership has just allowed this because, And again, I don't think all this was overnight. I think this was just a slow decline in their devotion to the Lord. And again, I think it all went back to them not bringing in their offerings that they were supposed to bring. I think that was perhaps the first instance where they were not doing what they told the Lord they would do. Because then that allowed that room to be empty, which allowed Tobiah to live there, which one thing led to another. I hope everybody's understanding this, what's happening in this whole picture. And so he asked them there in verse 17, what evil is this that you're doing, and you profane the Sabbath day? Now you would think that if the Lord has allowed one day out of 7 to be a day where you don't have to do anything, That would probably be something I don't want to be doing. Boy, yeah, I got a day. Oh, I can't. You just use that as an excuse. Oh, I can't do that. It's a Sabbath. I think that'd be a pretty nice thing. Well, I can't go there because it's that, you know. Well, give you something to think about. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
My thinking is if we as Christians didn't shop there on Sunday, I would think the business would slow down enough that all the people went to church and claimed to be Christians did not shop.
Yeah.
You think Walmart would be open or these other stores?
Well, there's a lot. There are a lot of Gentiles out there, though. But I understand your point. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's the way it was when we was kids.
Yeah.
And another thing, never quite town was this here, if they had liquor or anything like that, you didn't eat there.
Yeah.
Of course, it'd be on Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right, like you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Things have certainly changed. Yeah. Yeah. Verse 18.
Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us, and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath.
So Nehemiah is reminding them of their fathers. Remember the captivity that our fathers went through in Babylon because they didn't hold the Sabbath? Remember all this stuff that's happened? And again, Nehemiah, and going back even to Zerubbabel and Ezra, have set them up for success. But the hearts of the people are far from God. But Nehemiah is reminded, did our fathers thus, did not our God bring us all this evil? And upon that, remember what this city was just 150 years ago? Verse 19.
And it came to pass, that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day.
So what this is saying is, as it began to get dark on Friday evening, Nehemiah commanded the gates of the city to be shut. Shut them, and don't let anybody in, don't let anybody out, because this is the Sabbath. You're supposed to be here for the Sabbath. So he's commanded that, and he's commanded that no burden be brought in on the Sabbath. So nobody was to bring stuff, except perhaps their offering. Notice, so, notice verse 20. I'll set this picture up after we read these verses.
So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them, and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath.
Now, get this picture. I want everybody to get this picture. So Nehemiah has now commanded the gates of the city to be shut. Probably on the all the while, the men of Tyre, which is up in Lebanon, are on their way with their wagon loaded full of stuff to sell to these Jews in Jerusalem. And they get there, and now the door's shut. So they camp outside the gate overnight because, well, we came this far and we got this stuff to sell. But I like how it says they done that once or twice. And then Nehemiah, I just like how he says it. Why are you doing this? If you come back, I'm going to beat the thunder out of you. Now, the term lay hands on could also mean they're going to grab them, either throw them out, beat them up, put them in the stockade or whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to just waylay them, but perhaps the way he's feeling, that's what's going to happen. But I don't necessarily blame the men of Tyre. I mean, they don't know any different. And for who knows how many years, they've came from far away to sell their goods to these Jews, and they're willing to buy on the Sabbath, so we're headed that way. So let's not blame the Gentiles here for what they're doing. Let's blame the Jews for allowing it to have happened for the months prior to begin with. But Nehemiah does take a strong stand against them, and it says, if you do it again, I'm going to throw hands on you. You're not going to be here on the Sabbath. Now, he did not kick them out during the rest of the week. Only on the Sabbath. Verse 22.
And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy.
So there's yet another prayer of Nehemiah that God would remember him and what he's trying to do here. Nehemiah is trying to do the right thing, not only for the Lord, but also for these people, God's people, that they have strayed from him. But we see here in verse 22 also that Nehemiah has now commanded the Levites to keep the gates shut, which that was supposed to be some of their job to begin with. So the gates are now going to be shut Friday evening and won't be open until Sunday morning. And if anybody shows up and they're camping outside, they're supposed to be shooed away. All right. Now, whoop. Well, he didn't even want them coming around, because there's just going to be a temptation for the Jews to open the gate and buy their stuff. Remember, they've got fresh, I say fresh fish, it's probably a week old, but you know what I mean. Yeah. I don't know, how did they get ice back then? Answer that. Yeah, I always thought about that, but yeah, they'd have to
They
be
use their freezers.
dried. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway. Oh, yeah, I'm running out of time. All right. Now, remember back at the end of Ezra, chapter 12, or chapter 10 of Ezra, they had a reading. Ezra chapter 10 perhaps was 75 years ago. Roughly, I'm just throwing out a number there to give us some context. They found that they had married wives. They've intermarried with heathens and Gentiles. They weren't supposed to do that, so they got divorces. Well, fast forward now in Nehemiah's day, the same thing has happened, and that's what the rest of this chapter will be dealing with, beginning in verse 23.
In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and of Moab.
Now again, this is an intermarriage. This is heathens and God's people marrying each other. And this is what Nehemiah has noticed. Verse 24.
And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves.
So Nehemiah, he's cursing them. He smote some of them, perhaps slapped them upside the head, plucked off their hair. Now, a lot of times if you were guilty of something, you would have your head shaved as a marker that you were guilty of whatever. And so that's what perhaps he's talking about here, that he's plucked off their hair. Yeah. Just now, as I said it out loud, I'm gonna, yeah.
Tammy?
I'm gonna look like Samson next week.
Hey,
Marker?
yeah.
Hey, I am guilty, and you are too. You guys just aren't shaving your head.
You aren't telling me anything I don't already
Yeah.
know.
Anyway,
I live with him.
but notice, he says, I made them swear that they shall not give their daughters or their sons, nor take their daughters or their sons for yourselves. We're going to swear that we're not going to do this. Now, again, this happens today, but God has given us provision for that or rules for that in the book of 2 Corinthians. I'm not going to go there again today, but understand that there is some, God does deal with that in the New Testament. But Nehemiah notices that not only are you intermarrying with these people of Ashdod and Ammon and Moab, how did I say that? Moab, but now their children aren't even speaking the Jews' language, which sadly at this point had become Aramaic because of the captivity at Babylon. But now they're speaking these foreign languages. Notice what he says in verse 26. You're right, Terry. I need
Did
to
not
hurry.
Solomon king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God. And God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin.
Solomon's biggest problem was not necessarily having so many wives, but having so many wives of the heathens. And he began to build temples and shrines to all these other gods to please his heathen wives. This was Solomon's downfall. Now, again, I'm not making an excuse for Solomon having so many wives, but that being said, this was Solomon's downfall, was being intermarried with these heathen people. Verse 27.
Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me.
So now we see here a grandson of Eliashib, the high priest, was married to Sanballat, who was again one of the agitators against Nehemiah and rebuilding the wall back in chapter 2. So we have Sanballat and Tobiah having close relations with the high priest.
Remember then, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, every one in his business, and for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good.
So he cleansed the temple. He cleansed the Levites. He separated all the heathens from the people. He has placed priests and given them specific jobs that they should have had all along, or have forsaken all along, and made everyone in his business. So everybody, all the Levites, had a task to do. And so Nehemiah prayed for them, and he cleansed them and set them apart to do the tasks that they were already assigned by God to do. And then it says there that the wood, and for the wood offering and the first fruits, because in Nehemiah's thinking, this is all going to become, they're going to begin bringing these offerings again. Now, we don't know whether they did or not. Perhaps they started again, but we really don't know because it leaves us off there. But we see here a degradation of their covenant that they made in chapter 10 just a few years later. And the complete lack of caring, not only for the temple, but for the Sabbath day as a whole, and intermixing him with the heathens that were around them. So, anyway, comments or questions?